What if everything we think we know about the first Americans is wrong? What if, in a lonely cave above a dead lake in Nevada, there was once a war? Not between tribes, not between nations, but between us. And something else? Something taller, something hungrier, something official history insists never existed. Welcome to Lovelock Cave, and to the story of the red-haired giants of ancient Nevada. Imagine you're standing in the high desert of Nevada. The wind is dry and sharp, pushing dust across a broad, cracked basin. Where you stand now, thousands of years ago, there was water, a vast inland sea called Humboldt Lake. The shoreline would have shimmered in the sun, reeds and cattails swaying in the breeze, thousands of waterfowl rising and landing, fish moving beneath the surface. Now it's gone. The lake is just a memory. Its bottom exposed as a flat, pale plain. The reeds are gone, the ducks are gone, the water is gone. All that remains is the hollow echo of what used to be. You look up from that dead lake bed toward a line of cliffs. There, halfway up the rock face, is a dark opening, a black mouth in the hillside. Lovelock Cave. From a distance, it looks like just another wound in the stone. But as you climb the rough path up to it, your breathing turning shallow in the thin, dry air. Something starts to feel off. You step into the chilly shade of the entrance, and the temperature drops. The world outside becomes distant. You are standing at the threshold of a story almost no one believes, and almost no one is allowed to prove. Inside, the air still carries a faint, acrid smell. It's the residue of guano, bat, and bird dung, built up here for centuries. Layered like pages in a book no one finished reading. On the rock near the entrance, you see something else. Blackened stone, charred and stained as if by intense fire. We are told that these burn marks are from campfires, ordinary people warming themselves at night, cooking food, telling stories. But the people who were here before archaeology, before tourists, before historians, told a different story. Because long before Lovelock Cave ever appeared in textbooks, the Paiute people already had a name for the ones who used this place. They called them Sai Te Ka. And in their language, that name does not mean peaceful neighbors by the lake. It means people eaters. It means thigh eaters. It means cannibals. Official archaeology gives us a clean, organized story. We are told that the cave was used from around 2600 BC until roughly the mid-1800s. It was, we are assured, a storage and habitation site for ordinary hunter-gatherers living around the old Humboldt Lake. They hunted waterfowl, caught fish, gathered seeds, and used this cave as a convenient shelter and storeroom. We're told that in 1911, guano miners entered Lovelock Cave for a purely practical reason, to remove the accumulated dung and sell it as fertilizer. As they dug into the floor of the cave, they began to find things. Lots of things. Storage pits, basketry, duck decoys made of cattail reeds and feathers that looked uncannily lifelike, fishing gear, sandals woven from plant fibers, shell beads, carved wooden objects, even something that looks like a grasshopper. By the time trained archaeologists were called in, over 20,000 artifacts had been recovered from the cave. 20,000 artifacts from a single site. We are told this confirms that an industrious culture lived here, harvesting the rich resources of the lake, storing their tools and equipment in the cave, using it for thousands of years. That's the official story. Safe, sanitized, contained. But there's another version. Older than archaeology, older than the guano miners, older than the textbooks. The Paiute version. And once you hear it, once you compare it with the physical evidence, the official story begins to crack. According to the Paiute, there was a time, long ago, when a very different people lived along the Humboldt River and around this lake. They were not like the later tribes. They were not like us. They were taller. They were stronger. They were ferocious. They wore their hair long and reddish, and they ate human flesh. These were the Sai Te Ka. The elders said that the Sai Te Ka would hide along the trails, ambushing Paiute travelers. They would dig deep pits in the paths at night, cover them with branches and brush, and wait for people to fall in. Those who fell were dragged out, killed, and eaten. Even the graves of the Paiute dead were not safe. The Sai Te Ka would dig them up and devour the bodies. We are told these are just monsters from myth, like ogres in a fairy tale, but the legend doesn't stop at horror. It goes into strategy, into war, into geography. For a long time, the Paiute and neighboring tribes endured this. At first, they tried to live with it. Some even tried to adopt a few of the Sea Te-Ka into their own families, hoping to change them, to make them like men, not beasts. But nothing changed. The Sea Te-Ka continued to kill and eat them. Finally, the tribes united. They decided the Sea Te-Ka could not remain. A war began. Not a brief conflict, not a single battle, but a drawn-out, grinding war that lasted, the elders said, for years. Thousands of warriors fought around this lake. The Sea Te-Ka were terrifying opponents, swift, agile, and ruthless. The stories say that when arrows were fired at them, they could leap into the air, catch the arrows, and fire them back. Is that an exaggeration, symbolic, or is it a distorted memory of someone faster, stronger, and more skilled than the people telling the story? So far beyond them that the only language they had left to describe it sounded like magic. Whatever the truth, the war stretched on. The numbers on both sides dwindled. At last, the Sea Te-Ka were pushed back. They retreated toward the mountains on the eastern side of the lake and disappeared into a cave high above the shore, a cave with a commanding view of the water, a cave that today we call Lovelock. The tribes followed them to the cave mouth. The Sea Te-Ka had barricaded themselves inside. The warriors called out to them, offering a final choice. Come out. Stop eating people. Live as we do. The answer from the darkness was no. So the tribes gathered reeds, the same reeds that grew thick along the lake, reeds that the Sea Te-Ka themselves had used for boats, decoys, and weaving. The tribes piled those reeds at the entrance of the cave. They shouted one last time into the shadows, "Will you give up? Will you live like men and not eat people like beasts? Say it now, and we will put out the fire." There was no reply. They lit the reeds. The flames leapt up, thick smoke pouring into the cave entrance, forcing its way past any obstacles inside. Some stories say a few of the Sea Te-Ka tried to rush out and were immediately shot with arrows. Others say none escaped. The fire burned and burned. When the warriors tried to approach, the smell of burning flesh and hair overwhelmed them. The cave, they said, became a tomb. For generations, the Paiute carried this story. They told their children, "We fought them. We burned them in their cave. We wiped them out. They left one clue, one word, repeating like an echo. Sea Te-Ka, cannibals." Now remember, this story was recorded in the 1800s, decades before the guano miners of 1911 began tearing into the floor of Lovelock Cave, decades before archaeologists saw the burn marks on the stone. So ask yourself, how did a myth know there was a cave high above a lake with a burned entrance where someone had made a last stand? Is that fantasy or memory? Walk back inside Lovelock Cave in your mind. You step off the modern wooden platform and imagine the floor as it used to be, deeper, layered, undisturbed. Think of guano filling the space over centuries, sealing whatever lay beneath in a thick, organic cement. When miners began digging for profit in 1911, they didn't start with scalpels and notebooks. They used shovels, picks, sacks. They were hauling out material by the ton. Not long after they started, fanning out into the darkness with lanterns, they found something they did not expect. A body. A tall, mummified body, around 6 feet 6 inches. The conditions of the cave had preserved it, drying the flesh, shrinking the skin against the bones, and the hair was red. We are told that hair can turn reddish after death, that this is a normal reaction to environmental conditions. That might be true in some cases, but it's interesting, isn't it? That here we have a preserved corpse with red hair in the exact place where the Paiute said red-haired cannibals were burned in their cave. We are told not to connect the dots. We are told it's coincidence. The miners kept digging and finding. Storage pits filled with duck decoys, layers of reed and fiber, carefully stacked, sealed, and covered. So many objects emerged that archaeologists would eventually catalog over 20,000 artifacts from the site. Consider what that means. If this cave was only occasionally used as a shelter or storeroom, would you expect tens of thousands of items? Would you expect such density of human activity in this one hidden chamber? Or does this look more like a base of operations? A central stronghold, a headquarters above the lake, controlling the resources below. And as we sift through the surviving reports, we hear hints of more bodies, more skeletons, some mummified, some not, some large, some described as unusually robust. There are accounts of a particularly impressive mummy, referred to by locals as a giant, being taken by a fraternal lodge and boiled down so the skeleton could be used for initiation rituals. That skeleton, we're told, is gone now. How convenient. How many bones were destroyed? How many quietly removed, sold, lost, or stored without labels? How many disappeared into institutions that would later insist they have no record of giants? Again, is that coincidence or a pattern? Lovelock Cave is not the only piece of this puzzle. In 1904, near the town of Winnemucca, not far from Lovelock, workers digging gravel uncovered human bones about 12 feet below the surface. The bones were large, very large. Local observers measured them. A portion of the ulna, one of the forearm bones, suggested a complete length of 17 to 18 inches. Metacarpal bones of the hand measured around 4.5 inches. Doctors examined the material and calculated that the man must have stood around 11 feet tall. 11 feet. We're told later that this was exaggerated. A 1930s report revised the height down to around 9.5 feet. Even that is enough to shatter our sense of what's possible. Yet the skeleton no longer exists for us to check. It too reportedly went to an institution and disappeared. So, we have a reported giant skeleton near Winnemucca. We have reports of tall, mummified individuals with red hair from Lovelock. We have rumors and fragments of multiple oversized skeletons and robust skulls from the region, some described as 6.5 or 7 feet tall, with unusually large jaws and archaic anatomical features. Above all that, we have the Paiute legend of towering, red-haired cannibals on this very lake. If you saw this pattern in any other context, if this were a series of crime reports, or sightings of a rare animal, or fragments of a lost manuscript, would you dismiss it as nonsense? Or would you acknowledge that something consistent is being remembered, measured, and then suppressed? Again and again, the story is the same. Strange remains are found, measurements are taken, newspapers report, institutions accept the bones, and then silence. We are told that no evidence exists after the evidence was taken away. That's not the absence of proof. That's the removal of proof. Even where bones survive, they cause trouble. Some skulls found in the wider Lovelock region have been described as robust and archaic, with strong brow ridges, pronounced neutral crests at the back of the skull, retreating foreheads, heavy occipital areas. Traits we're told belong to earlier, more ancient human populations. One such skull, discovered south of Lovelock and examined by an anthropologist, was estimated to be older than 8,000 years. It was compared to early Central California populations that shared similar robust features. In other words, this was not a recent skull from a modern person. This was deep time. Other reports mention jawbones that are 12 to 20% larger than the average for humans of the period, large enough to stand out, small enough that the word giant would be avoided by anyone desperate to maintain the official narrative. We are told these are just random variations, big individuals. We are told that robust features do not mean a different type of human, just a different style of face. But put it all together, in this region, we have legends of giant cannibals. We have reported skeletons towering over normal height ranges. We have robust skulls that look more archaic than later populations. We have oversized jaws and oversized sandals, some over 15 inches long, found among the artifacts. How many times can we say just a coincidence before it becomes a lie? Now consider some of the objects from Lovelock and its surroundings. Among the many artifacts is a small donut-shaped stone about 4 inches across. Carved into it are 365 notches on the outside and 52 on the inside, the number of days in a year, the number of weeks in a year. We are told that early Americans were primitive, their understanding of time and astronomy limited, that they might have known the seasons, yes, but not tracked the year with such precision. Then a stone like this appears. We are told, as always, that it could be a coincidence, that the counts might be off, that we shouldn't leap to conclusions. But mathematics doesn't care what we're told. 365 is not just a random number. 52 is not just a decoration. Someone here was counting days. Someone here understood cycles. Someone here cared enough to encode that knowledge into stone. Add that to the thousands of expertly made duck decoys, the effective fishing gear, the carefully organized storage pits, This is not a casual, disorganized group barely scraping by. This looks like a culture that had settled into its environment, mastered it, and operated with a studied regularity. Now add again the oral traditions. These were not gentle villagers. These were predators, cannibals, beings who used that knowledge to dominate the lake, a stable resource base, a central stronghold, a complex grasp of time, brutal behavior toward others. What do you call a group like that? We call them primitive. The ancients called them giants. Beyond Lovelock, in a nearby location known as Spirit Cave, another mummy was found, carefully wrapped, buried, and preserved. This individual was later dated to around 9,400 years old. In the wider Humboldt Pyramid Lake region, ancient petroglyphs carved into rock near the water have been dated to roughly 14,800 years before present. These carvings predate many of the world's most famous ancient sites. They point to a human presence here deep into the last ice age. So step back and look at the timeline. Rock carvings nearly 15,000 years old, mummies nearly 10,000 years old, robust skulls older than 8,000 years, a long-lived lake culture persisting for millennia. Legends of a cannibal race remembered across generations. We are told that the first Americans trickled down from the north just 13,000 years ago, timidly moving into new lands. We are told the story is simple, linear, and uniform. But the evidence here screams something else. Multiple populations, multiple time layers, multiple stories. And at least one of those stories ends in extermination by fire. The legends of Lovelock are not an isolated weirdness. Across North America, we find stories of tall, powerful beings, sometimes called giants, sometimes cannibal tribes, sometimes monstrous sorcerers, who lived here before the ancestors of today's tribes. In some accounts, they herd mammoths the way we herd cattle. In others, they are pale-skinned or red-haired, inhabiting caves and remote mountains. Again and again, the story follows a familiar path. They are stronger. They are dangerous. They prey on humans. There is a long war. They are finally trapped and destroyed, often with fire, sometimes with flooding, sometimes with trickery. Here in the Lovelock region, we find the tale of a giant called Snehaha, said to be able to kill people with a glance, carrying a basket full of thorns on his back. In one story, he kills entire groups just by looking at them. This is myth, yes, but myth about what? Is it just a story to scare children? Or is it how people preserve the memory of an enemy they could not fully understand? And what do we do today when myth after myth across a continent describes beings who are larger than humans, often cannibalistic, always dangerous, and ultimately wiped out? We're told, ignore it. It's symbolic, it means nothing. But why are the symbols so consistent? Why are the enemies always big? Why do they always end in extermination? If this were just one story, we could dismiss it. But it's not one story. This is not a coincidence. This is a pattern. Some researchers connected to Lovelock investigations once speculated that the strange people of this region might have had connections far beyond Nevada, maybe even to places as distant as Egypt. We are told this is ridiculous, that no such ancient transoceanic contact is possible. We are told that to even suggest such a thing is pseudoscience. But listen to one of the funerary customs attributed to the Saita Ka. Before they were forced into the cave, they are said to have sent their dead out onto the lake in reed boats. They would place the body on a craft made of bundled tools, load it with rocks, set the whole thing on fire, and push it into the water. The burning boat would drift, then sink, carrying the charred remains to the lake bottom. In later times, explorers found piles of bones, rocks, and artifacts in strange concentrations out in the middle of where the lake once lay. Fire on water, reeds, ritual burning, a body carried by flame and then consumed by the depths. Practices like this echo in other ancient cultures across the world. No one is saying Egyptians colonized Nevada, but we are being forced to see that complex ritual behavior existed here in deep time. Behavior that suggests a developed worldview, not a mindless scramble for survival. Once again, the picture forming is not of primitive cave dwellers. It is of a people who knew exactly what they were doing, economically, ritually, strategically. And if they truly once rode this lake, controlling it from high vantage points like Lovelock Cave, imagine the terror of the smaller tribes, watching reed boats gliding silently across the water, firelight flickering on red hair, knowing that the ones on board might come ashore to eat them. Is it really so strange that the survivors would never forget? Now, let's talk about the numbers. The official story would rather you not add up. We have deep timelines, petroglyphs around 14,800 years old, mummies nearly 10,000 years old, robust skulls older than 8,000 years, and a cave used at least since 2600 BC, and perhaps much earlier. We have huge artifact density, over 20,000 objects from one cave, even after industrial mining removed much of the original deposits. We have physical anomalies, oversized sandals, giant jawbones, robust skulls, and multiple accounts of very tall skeletons, some described as 9 to 11 feet in height, some with red hair. We have corroborating myths, detailed oral traditions describing red-haired cannibals, a long war, a final siege in a cave above the lake, reeds burned at the entrance, and a refusal to stop eating human flesh. We have institutional behavior, skeletons sent to large museums never seen again, mummies destroyed by lodges, official statements decades later claiming there is no evidence of a red-haired race, even though earlier records show that such evidence was once in their possession. Individually, each of these pieces can be challenged. Maybe the measurements were wrong. Maybe the stories are exaggerations. Maybe the artifacts were misinterpreted. Maybe the records got lost. But all of them, together. How many times can measurements be off in the same direction? How many legends can accidentally match real geography and real burn marks? How many bones can vanish into the same kinds of institutions without anyone asking why? The probability of this being random misfortune shrinks with every new detail. At some point, it's no longer rational to say, there is nothing here. At some point, the only irrational position is the official one. So what's really going on? Look again at the pattern. In deep time, an advanced wetland culture emerges around an inland lake. Its people are physically robust, some of them tall enough to stand out dramatically from later populations. They build reed boats, track time with calendars, hunt waterfowl with lifelike decoys, and stash their tools and gear in cave systems. From the perspective of smaller, later arriving groups, they are overwhelming. They steal food, bodies, and perhaps even land. They may have different genetics, different features, different habits. They might see the newcomers not as equals, but as prey. Over time, the newcomers organize. They gather in alliance with other tribes. A conflict begins and drags on for years. Many die on both sides. Finally, the newcomers trap the older people in their cave, ignite reeds at the entrance, and burn them out. The old race dies. Those who were recorded as red-haired cannibals, the Saitaka, disappear from the land. Yet they do not disappear from memory. Their story is carried for centuries in ritual, song, and legend. It is eventually written down by a Paiute woman recording the history of her people. She claims to own a dress trimmed with reddish hair, taken from the exterminated cannibals. Hair passed down from ancestor to descendant. Then white settlers arrive. They dig into the cave looking for fertilizer. They find mummies, skulls, sandals, artifacts, and bones. Some of those remains are measured, some are admired, some are stolen for secret rituals, others are sent to institutions. Over the coming decades, the more troublesome pieces, those that point to beings who do not fit the story of normal humans, quietly vanish. Later, with the evidence gone or buried, officials step forward and declare, no giants, no red-haired race, nothing to see. The case is closed, except the cave is still here. The burns are still on the rock. The legends still match the landscape. The reports of giants are still in old newspapers. The measurements are still in forgotten documents. And the questions, your questions, are still very much alive. If even one of those gigantic skeletons was real, if even one of those 9-foot or 11-foot individuals truly existed, then our understanding of human history is wrong. Not slightly wrong, not needs a tweak wrong, utterly wrong. It would mean that at least one other human or human-like population shared this continent with the ancestors of today's tribes. It would mean that our species' story is not a clean line of progress, but a tangled web of branches, some of which ended in extermination, others in absorption, others in complete erasure. It would mean that genocide did not start with modern empires. It began far earlier, between different kinds of humans. And if this is true here, in one cave in Nevada, how many other places hide similar stories? How many lakes once had their own Sea Ka, tall, predatory, older than old races, now reduced to myths, their bones removed, their names turned into legends? How many museums have basements filled with crates that no one opens, because to open them would be to open a door into a version of the past that modern institutions simply cannot allow? We are told that none of this is real. We are told that giants are fantasy. We are told that red-haired cannibals never lived in Lovelock Cave. But then you walk up here, you stand at the entrance, you smell the old guano, you touch the burned rock, you look down at the dead lake bed and imagine the water, the reeds, the boats, the battles, and something deep inside you whispers, "This happened." So what is Lovelock Cave, really? Is it just a prehistoric storeroom, or is it a tomb? Is it an ordinary archaeological site, or a smoking gun? Is this place a minor footnote in Nevada's history, or the scene of the last stand of a human population that science has quietly decided must never be acknowledged? The official story wants you to look away, to accept that all the missing bones are just clerical errors, that all the consistent legends are just imaginative fiction, that all the measurements pointing to giants were just silly mistakes. But the cave is still here, and the char is still here, the stories are still here, the pattern is still here. You can bury bones, you can lose crates, you can whitewash reports, you can repatriate skulls before anyone tests the DNA. But you cannot erase the fact that this land remembers. You cannot erase the fact that math and myth are pointing in the same direction. There is a chapter missing from the history of this continent. It smells like smoke. It looks like red hair. It ends in a cave full of fire, somewhere under layers of policy, fear, and dust. The truth waits. Was Lovelock Cave the final refuge of a lost race of red-haired giants? Were the Sea Ka real? Flesh, bone, blood, and hunger? And if they were, what else has been erased? That is the question hovering over the silent entrance, over the dead lake, over the forgotten artifacts scattered in museum storage rooms. And for all the official declarations, all the tidy explanations, one thing is certain: the story of Lovelock Cave is not over, the evidence is not done speaking, and the investigation is only beginning.